people say, you're your own boss, you got it made. And I said, well, everybody that bellies up to my counter is my boss. I have customers who used to bring their child in when they bring their shoes to get serviced and sit them on the counter. And now that child who was on the counter is bringing their kids in and sitting them on the counter. So they're more than just a ring up on my register or more than a name on a ticket. They've gotten to be friends. I had people who romanticized being their own boss and owning their own business and didn't realize just the amount of work and effort that you have to do to do that. Well, I'm 66 as I speak right now, and I am now actively engaged in conversation with the people that are going to help mentor me to transcend into the retirement. I put a lot of effort and time into my business, but at the end game, it's not really worth anything because no one's buying shoe repairs. Nothing is etched in stone. You can always pivot, and the only failure is if you don't try it.
Well, Henry, thank you for being the first in this series in which we get to speak with local Kansas City business owners. People may not know who you are, so why don't we just start with some introductions as who you are and how you're acquainted with Kansas City.
Okay. My name's Henry Barbosa Jr., and I am the owner-operator of a small little business in downtown Overland Park called Overland Park Shoe Repair. I've been in that location personally since 1986. The shop was started back in 1960. I am the fifth owner of the business, and I've been doing it the trade of shoe repair, leather repair, since 1978. I am a native Kansas Cityan. Was born and raised in Kansas City, pretty much in the Brookside area. I lived for a few years South Florida and learned my trade a little bit more so down there. And that's a small synopsis of a little bit of where I'm from, what I do, and what I hope to continue to do for a few more years.
I've been chatting with people this week that I was going to have a chance to talk with you, and more than one person said, isn't that a dying breed? And I thought to myself, that's very true now, but it must not have been what you were thinking when you were coming up in the trade. You weren't thinking, oh, this is a dying breed.
Not at all, because when I first got introduced to shoe repair, back then before the internet and Google and Angie's List, there was the yellow pages. Let your fingers do the walking. Well, and you crack it open to a shoe repair or leather repair, there was 10, 15, 20 pages full of
20 pages?
Active shops. We're talking back in the early 70s, when I had an uncle who was a shoe repairman. So, there were shoe repair shops everywhere. And
explain to the young people what the yellow pages are these days to even get them to understand that.
Exactly. Yellow pages is an index of all the businesses in the metro area. And then you had the white pages, of course, which was residential. But there was a plethora of shoe repair, leather repair shops in Kansas City at that time. And they were all youngsters running the shops, in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And then you got old-timers, 60s and 70s. But yeah, when I first got into it, I didn't know how long I would be in it, to be quite honest with you. I was just looking to pull a paycheck because I really didn't, I didn't go to college. I didn't, I could have worked corporate America, but it just didn't seem to be in my DNA. I like, working with my hands and hands-on and visual, the people and the men I worked for. And it just seemed to manifest itself over a period of time. The more I did it, the more comfortable I got. The quality of my skill improved. And it just seemed to take on a life of its own. I didn't dread going to work. I enjoyed meeting people who came into my shop or into the shop I was working at. And I like to think of it, it's a trade that allowed me to have the human touch. kept my finger on the pulse of society because I'm talking to them. I wasn't reading about what was happening in the world. I was in it, talking to people who were living their life's journey. And, it, it, it provided me with a trade. It provided me the place to go to on a daily basis, but it also provided me the abilities to be a human being a human with other humans. And, and that's real special to me, the human touch, the personal level. And and I service people. They come in with something that they cherish. It could be their father's that was handed down to them, and I restore it where they're able to, get some joy and pleasure out of the fact that this was my pop's and now that's mine and I'm utilizing it. And he was helping and he helped me to do it.
Right.
So, people get attached to the craziest little things, and I'm able to keep them attached to it.
Well, one of my favorite titles for you is Healer of Souls. And I think as you're describing that, I think people who are watching or listening to this can get that sense. Part of it's your personality. I don't think everyone thinks, oh, everyone in the industry is like Henry. You're sort of a natural fit for being a healer of souls. And when you think about those things that we're attached to, there's so much that has changed from the time when you were looking. In fact, I think we talked some other time about the fact that there were aptitude tests. You could test for Pacific Bell or whomever else and potentially get a job that wasn't the path that you chose. Today, there's so much pressure around college. So the part that began your life was very different. But also now, so many people wear casual shoes or shoes that don't get mended, or people don't even think of that. I remember sharing, talking about you with someone, people said, oh, people do that? It didn't even occur to them, which then made me think, oh, you don't own anything that would be mended, or if you did, it wouldn't occur to you. There's another, for example, Bag and Baggage in Prairie Village. They're one of the few within hundreds of miles that repair luggage. And I remember telling somebody this, and she said, you can repair luggage? I said, you can repair pretty much anything in life, and that's part of the challenge. We are so used to the affluence we have in America. We don't realize there are so many parts of the world in which clothing is repaired. And that's partially because people don't have money to just go buy new clothes. It's a necessity. But then there's also a real love and craft. I've had a shirt mended by some grandma in Moldova before, and I used Google Translate to speak to her in her language because we didn't share language together, but she mended that with love and care, as if I was a relative. And I think what you're talking about, what you're doing, it's possible to do any business, any craft with love and care. And yet it seems that so much of that has drained out of our lives since you first entered the working world.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree with that statement. Uh, there was a time, during my journey as a shoe repairman that not only was no one getting into the trade, but most shoe repairs were like in a corner or in a back street. They weren't real visible. There was an entity called Shoe Express that came into town, and they opened 15, 20 shops with the invisible areas in the shopping in Oak Park Mall and strip malls. So shoe repair got a new facelift. People realized, oh yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, I have these things, these pair of shoes I want to get repaired. And I remember seeing, a shoe repair. They became more visible, and that was a big boost back in the, I would say in the early '80s when they were around, and that gave a shoe repair more visibility. So people started coming out and getting their stuff repaired. Because if you don't see something, we as the society, out of sight, out of mind. You just don't go down there on that path because, well, if it's not what in my sight, it doesn't exist, which is a whole different conversation about the vision of the human being. But it, but the pendulum has swung because people, especially during the COVID, when people were losing their jobs, where people weren't working, they had to keep, and they were watching their pennies, And I know what the economy is doing based on the volume that comes through my shop and what people are fixing because,
You're your own index.
yeah, which goes back to my initial statement that I keep my finger on the pulse of humanity on what's really going on in the world because I'm talking to my people. I'm talking to the, people who are not having the discretionary funds that a lot of affluent people have in the Johnson County. So, and the industry has done a pretty good job in keeping up with the materials and the adhesives that you're able to transition into repairing these casual shoes that you just referenced. I still do, the leather soles, the welter shoes, the higher end, but I'm also able to do the casual shoe because the industry has kept up with the soles, with the aftermarket stuff. And plus, and I say this not to be, egotistical, but there's not a whole lot that I can't repair unless I can't repair it because the item itself doesn't warrant it for me to do that. So, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I think I've been very fortunate that I take being a service-oriented business very seriously. You come in to me for a fix, and so I'm going to fix it. So I very rarely say no. So in having that type of mindset, I have been able to develop ways to repairing a lot of things that a lot of people, my contemporaries, would not repair because they haven't put the thought into it.
Right. And I think I should confess a little bit here that part of how we've gotten to know each other is you've been repairing my stuff for more than a decade now. That I first started going to you when I lived in Overland Park, lived not so very far from downtown Overland Park, actually. You would do my regular leather shoes. And over time, I think I may have come to you for different things. But what I was surprised, I was chatting with you earlier this week and some customers came in and I thought, well, this isn't, because you think shoe repair, but I know that you also do these general goods. But this lady came in with a couple sets of jeans and the sort of riveted button was missing. And I thought, but he's not a seamstress. But it was something she had worked with you on something else and you had said, well, I could fix that. And that goes back to craftsmanship, that the ability to fix then can bleed out into other areas that you wouldn't normally think like, oh, I can help fix jeans. That's not going to be, it still says shoe repair outside the door, but I'm sure you've got a bunch of interesting stories as to the different things that you've repaired over time.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to diversify. That's one thing I found out early on. Yes, I am a shoe repair, leather repair, but my tentacles reach far and wide on all kinds of stuff I do. I even have some customers who bring in their jeans and I do some really radical patchwork on it just so they can keep their jeans, with the holes and the patches on the,
Okay.
so like I said earlier, it's very rare that I say no to something unless something is not repairable because I'm not going to take your money simply because and do a job that's not going to be sustainable, and I'm pretty, authenticity and transparency is a pretty good creed that I live by. I hate sudden stops and I know my customers don't want any. So this is this. I point and say, this is what I can do. This is what it's going to cost. And this is what I think about me doing this job. And then I allow the person on the other side of the counter to decide whether they want to go forward with it. But, I do a lot of orthopedic work. I do x-ray vest, putting Velcro and bindings. I just do an array of certain things. And, by doing that, people don't hesitate to question, well, so can you do this? And I'm going, yeah, I'm willing to try, I mean,
I think that's the essence of entrepreneurship in general is the phrase, we can figure it out, or I can figure it out. And that trial and error of, not being afraid to fail, not being able to, being afraid of trying something. I think that's so important. So we're talking about sort of your mastering of the craft. I want to go back a little bit to Fort Myers, the early days, because we talked about the fact that you were around those old timers, those masters of craft. And as you were beginning your journey, you were thinking, oh, I can't do that or I can't do that, but you could see where you could go. And those things started to develop for you. What were those things that early on you saw those old timers do that blew you away?
well, the thinking back, the first thing that hits me is I worked for a man named Lloyd, and I only had a couple years under my belt. But being wired how I was wired back in those days, I was terminal. I thought I was terminally hip, slick, and cool. I have 2 years in this trade. I know how to do this stuff. I got it down. Well, I went to work for this man named Lloyd, his own business, and he hired me. And Lloyd and I was only with him for a year, and we kind of butt heads simply because not the person he was, but the person I was. I thought I knew it all. I walked into his shop with 2 years, closed mind, thought I knew it could be.
Unfortunately, many of us in our 20s.
So fast forward into a few months, what I did was I jacked the shoes, which means I took the shoes, took the soles off, whether it was a half sole with the heel or a full sole. So it's called jacking the shoe, taking the old stuff off. And then I'd go over to a sander and sand it and prep it for the new soles, put the new soles on, trim it, rough trim, and then throw it over to Lloyd where he did all the fine trim. And Lloyd would look at what I did, throw it back at me. I said, do it again. You did this. He did that often because I knew what I was supposed to do, but I didn't know the proper way in which to do it. So I would trim it with an angle, and you can't do that when you're trimming a plethora of things that I did wrong. And he would always look at it and throw it back at me. He did that often, to the point where I used to develop a resentment. But with hindsight, after I left him, in hindsight, I realized he said to me, you might not be the best, but you got to do the best you can, and you got to do it right. So not only was he losing money, material costs, throwing it back at me, but production and salary. So he was losing 3 times on me, but being the man he was, he looked at me and says, you got to do it right, or don't do it at all.
It was beautiful.
And do it again, do it again, do it again. And he instilled in me that I might not be the best out there, but I have to do the best I can, because what I give you is an extension of me and my business. And how you do anything is how you do everything.
That's a very great and important phrase.
And he taught me that, and I don't think he even realized that. And it was years later, after I was surrounded by other individuals who were wonderful craftsmen, and I took what I could from them. And then there was craftsmen that weren't very wonderful, and that taught me something also, how not to do it, how not to play it out on certain levels. So I went back to Lloyd years later and shook his hand and thanked him, for instilling that in me, because from the get-go, it changed my trajectory and how I did it. And not giving up, and mentoring. He didn't know he was. He thought he hired a seasoned shoe repairman. He thought a couple years. He probably knew I wasn't seasoned, but I don't think he thought he was going to get less than what he got.
Right. Was Lloyd 3 or 4 years into the journey for you?
He was about 2 years, 2.5 years.
Okay, so very, very,
very from the get-go.
And this is, Apex Business Advisors, we buy and sell businesses. We help people do that. So at some point, as you're apprenticing and you're being a journeyman, did it enter into your mind that you wanted to own your own business?
I think I was into quite a handful of years before I really thought that I should own my own business, because as I believe, my life has been a journey, and in this journey, my way of thinking, traditional, it transcends into what's really important. And I worked a lot of shops for individuals and made them, a lot of money, but it wasn't my shop. So there was a few things that I chose really not to implement, because it wouldn't benefit me as an individual and a craftsman. I was a good employee and I was accountable and I showed up and did what I was supposed to be doing. But there was a time when I finally realized that, like the shop I'm at now, in Overland Park Shoe Repair, when I walked in those doors, that shop needed help. And I'm just stating fact. I don't want to sound like I'm egotistical, but I worked very hard to make that shop worthy of somebody walking into it. And I did that, and I transitioned that shop into that. And I finally one day woke up and said, I need to own this business if I'm going to continue improving it like I'm doing. All the effort, all the time, all the, focus, because I was working some long hours doing what I was doing. And I made an offer to the guy and he took it. And then my journey was on, it was my journey, I can make it whatever I wanted to make it. And I was very fortunate that it turned out to be a pretty cool little place to be.
It's funny because I've only ever known you as the proprietor, but it feels very natural to you. So it never occurred to me, I'm sure I knew you apprenticed at some point. Like you didn't just pop out of the womb and own a business.
With a hammer and a tack in my mouth.
Right, exactly. But it didn't occur to me to think until we've had a chance to allude to, I said, I want to talk to you about, your life. And I actually, we talked about this a couple of years ago, I think. And finally the opportunity came, said, okay, let's finally chat about that. In my mind, I thought, well, he must have made that decision early on because he's a natural. He's a natural business owner. There's times where you and I are chatting and the phone's ringing and my brain, just the way I'm an owner, I say, oh, you got to answer that. Let's stop what we're talking about. And you're like, don't worry, it'll answer itself. And I remember telling somebody, but I said, that is the ease of a business owner who knows what his business is, which is if it's important, they'll call back. The speed at which I answer the phone or the fact that I answer the first time, that is not going to chase someone away. The supreme confidence you have that I have confidence in my craft. If they need me, they'll call back. I'm not going to interrupt this conversation I'm having. And people forget that's part of the joy of business ownership is building a life in which you're in charge.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. When you walk in my door, I give you my full attention. And like you stated, if the phone, there's a machine that says, if you reach this message during normal business hours, it's most likely I'm waiting on another customer. A message or a call back would be appreciated. So, if I'm concentrating on you, I'll concentrate on them when I'm done with what's really right in front of me. And that's pretty much how I approach life. I can't worry about what's going on over here or what's going to happen over here, but right here, I can add to it. I can bring something to it. I can, give you the time that you're worthy of having because you walked in my shop. So here I am, what can I do for you?
Right.
And, I don't know if it comes natural or if I actively engaged in that type of mindset or behavior, but, the human touch is very important. It always has been in my life. I get emotionally charged by people and their journey, and I learn from them as well. And I try to make my place a comfortable place to come into, a welcoming place. My shop is an extension of me. I mean, just the whole ambiance of it, the things hanging on the wall and all the little knickknacks and trinkets customers over the years have brought to me, and that's just fulfills my desire to be present when they come in. Because something I must say that is very touching to me is I have customers who used to bring their child in when they bring their shoes to get serviced and sit them on the counter. And now that child who was on the counter is bringing their kids in and sitting them on the counter. So they're more than just a ring up on my register or more than a name on a ticket. They've gotten to be friends. So
And I think it's difficult, and I'm hoping we don't create too much of a stampede by this episode of people coming to talk, see the ambiance for themselves. But I think for me, there are two things I associate. First, I'm going to open that door and those bells are going to ring that are attached. And then I'm going to smell that smell, which I don't know what it is. I'm sure it's the materials, the what's used to do it, but I associate it with shoe repair. I associate it with working with leather and working with that. But I smell and I like it. And I know, okay, I know where I am now. And there's that sense experience. People talk about smell memories, that, they think about childhood food or whatever else. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that shoe repair is like childhood food, but there's a particular smell that's associated with that experience. And it's not often that you go into a business and you're able to, bell rings, I have that smell, and then I know someone's going to come out from behind those swinging doors at some point, maybe, or hold on, I'll be there in a second. And that's part of just the simple things. I think we're so used to, let's say, a certain coffee brand where there's this drive-through commoditization, or you can even use an app, pick it up. No one needs to talk to you. You didn't need to exchange any money. Just pick it up, leave. And this is what it's come to. I can't even talk to somebody when I pick up a cup of coffee. And I think you're a real throwback in that way. And even when you came to the business, you said you were the fifth owner, right?
Of that shop.
Of that shop.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And yeah. One thing about shoe repair, or traditional shoe repair, because you see, shoe repair shops that happen to be an alteration shop or a dry cleaners, mine is a shoe repair shop. And one thing about my trade is it really hasn't changed per se since the dawn of time. You still take tacks and and you hammer, and you have machines that sew. There's no industrial revolution that has happened in the industry, and which is kind of cool. And it's a customer service, which used to be all small towns, like small town USA's, used to be the owner operated customer service. And there's a sad narratives to the fact that society as a whole don't really know what customer service is, not because they can't look it up or think about it. They've never experienced it. So if you never experience it, how can you miss it? And then when you do experience it, it's just kind of a, wow, what was that?
And that's the price we pay. I think part of what people have not understood is we chase lowest prices, right? There's a certain brand that says always low prices, and that there's a price to pay for that. That customer service comes attached to someone who has a place at that job. They don't think they're going to get fired. They're part of the community. They might come in early. They might suggest, as you said, alterations to make the business do better. But there's a certain ownership, even from someone who's not yet an owner, that leads them to that. And so there is a price to be paid for chasing low prices. And part of that is going to be customer service, which is, as you say, people are so shocked when they get it that they chase after it. They don't know what they were missing. Gosh, I was missing customer service, because whatever that is, I want to pay for that now, because that felt wonderful.
Yeah. It's customer service is so simple. It's just being kind, being real. And that's a whole different conversation on my thoughts on that. But shoe repair has been very good to me over the years. Everything I have, all my needs are met, and a few of my wants I've been able to obtain. But I have a place to go every morning. I'm very fortunate, even though I don't partake in the technology of the day, but all my customers do, with Angie's List, Next Door Neighbor, Google. I wake up, look at my girlfriend, and I say, well, let's see what this day brings and what I can do with it. Go to my shop and open up. And people seem to come in. And it's been happening that way for some time. And I don't lose sight how fortunate I am, because no advertisement dollar, I just show up.
Did you ever think about doing it? Did you ever think, because we talked about the yellow pages way back in the day, or by the time that you had acquired the business, there was enough momentum that you didn't have to think about that?
I never thought that shoe repair was going to be my path, and being an owner operator, or I don't even really consider myself an entrepreneur. I'm just some cat who goes to work and fix shoes and try to maintain an accountability to what I do as far as my trade goes. And I am a firm believer in it. And I believe it because of my life's experience. I just show up and things happen. And I thank God that I'm able to pump those brakes or take pause and notice what's going on and take action on the things that are happening to me. And by doing that, I have been able to really see my role in what I do, in not only in my mind's eye, but in the community in downtown Overland Park. There's not too many service-oriented businesses down there anymore. And I'm probably the oldest operating shop in downtown Overland Park right now. And I take that to heart. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because it is working, but I have to maintain the attitude that it could stop at any day. So I'm very grateful, and I take it very seriously that I own a business and I'm serving the public. And people say, you're your own boss. You got it made. And I said, well, everybody that bellies up to my counter is my boss.
Right. Well, you before you bought Overland Park Shoe Repair, you were working for a gentleman who helped you set up at a shop downtown, right?
Right, a man named Leon Goodhart, a wonderful man. And he's one of those guys who came to America literally and excelled personally, financially, and never lost sight of who he was and where he was from. And he was very generous with his assets as far as businesses, and how he allowed an individual to come into his domain and excel. And then he would relinquish the ownership to the man who came in and excelled. Just an amazing man. And he set a lot of roots in my head. But I came back from Florida and worked with him. And
it's the late 80s, right?
Yeah. He, mid to early 80s. And he had a vision of downtown Kansas City before downtown Kansas City became what it was, or what it is now. He rented space at the Radisson Muehlebach when it was still the Radisson Muehlebach, and all in its full glory, with the lobby and the big oak bars, the haberdashery bar. And so he rented space there because he knew that down AT&T Pavilion was going to be going up, which is now Trans-American, one of the bigger builds. And so he knew the people were going to come, so he got a space there, and he offered me the opportunity to go and run this shop for him and create another success story, because he had a few businesses that by that time already sprinkled around. And it didn't go, what he didn't foresee is that the Muehlebach closing down. And so the vision was kind of lost. And by that time, I saw Overland Park Shoe Repair. And that's when I went to Overland Park Shoe Repair. But working with Leon, yeah, it showed me that you can be successful and still not lose track where you're from. And he gave me the opportunity really to run a shop for the first time on my own. So I was left to my own devices as far as, I wasn't mimicking anybody that I was working with who had more years under my belt. If I didn't do it before, I have to learn how to do it. So I developed the mindset of what one man can do, another man can duplicate. So I just studied what I was doing. I had a general idea about shoe repair and how shoes are put together and how machines worked and everything. So I was there left with my own devices and honing my skill by myself, which I thought was a wonder. With hindsight, everything's 20/20. And looking back at it, it allowed me to, one, learn more on my own, develop the confidence that, yes, I can do this without anybody showing me how to do it. And yes, I can get over the fact that I did it wrong for the first time. So now what can I do better now? So it allowed me to maintain an open mind to learning how to do it differently, how to do it a little better, how to do it a little more efficiently. And I was self-motivated. So that helped with, the journey when I transcended into Overland Park shoe repair, of owning my own business and making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's were crossed.
Right. And when did you start doing leather goods, other, making stuff in addition to repairing stuff?
Well, when I moved to Florida, Carol is who I worked for, a guy named Carol Barr and his girlfriend Susan. I learned the most from Carol Barr, flat out. I've told him that. I'm still good friends with him to this day. He was a craftsman, and he made leather goods. He owned a shoe repair shop, so we used to make rattleskin belts and chamois halter tops, 3 or 4 or 5 different sandals, wallets. We just made all kinds of leather goods from scratch, dyed them, tooled them, and I learned all that from him. And also how to do shoe repair, because he was a true craftsman, and he still is. But age catches up with all of us. It has me, and it has him, and other people that I admire who did leather works. But that's where I started making leather goods, or learned how to do it. And that's what got me into it. Kind of shied away from it of late, because my business keeps me busy enough where we used to make all that stuff after hours, After the shoe repair was put to rest for the day, we would start rolling out the leather and start cutting straps and dyeing and just making stuff.
I haven't even asked you about that. What is a day in the life? Because I'm only ever used to coming in and asking you to work on something. In fact, I'm wearing tonight. People can't see it obviously, but I'm wearing something you just repaired for me recently. But I'm only used to I'm leaving and someone else is walking in and hearing the bell ring. And I think, how does he get any work done with all of us just coming in to bother him all day? So can you walk us through, I'm just going to pick a Wednesday. What does a Wednesday look like from opening the door to closing the door for you?
I usually walk through the door first before I open the door to the public. And I usually get into my business and to the shop anywhere between, depending on the volume that I have in store for me for the coming week, anywhere between 5:30 or 6:30 at the latest. I open up at 10. So I do majority of the loud work, prepping and tearing stuff down before the door even opens. And when the 10 o'clock hits, showtime. Turn the lock on, disengage the lock, and I work in between phone calls and in between customers coming to my counter, but my production is usually before I open and after I open. Okay. Now I'm closed Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I try to take one day off, but I'm in there on Mondays, getting ready for the week. I'm in there on Tuesdays, getting ready for the week. But not open to the public. I stay anywhere between 2 hours to 4 hours, depending on the volume. But most of my day on my open hours is maintaining the customer coming in the door. Right. And I do get things done, but not from start to finish.
Yeah, I think about production time because that's fluctuated for me with you over the years at your experience that, so I was Steven, this is how far out. And then I think I heard you quote to someone, it's like, oh, we're about a week out, or the thing that you did for me recently was a week. And I remember part of this dividing line, I lived in France for a number of years and I had a cobbler there and he was always about 4 or 5 weeks out until COVID happened. And he told me, we chatted after lockdown and he's like, oh, I'm all caught up. He's like, I went fishing. And so that catching up was forced on him. But how does that ebb and flow for you as to, it's going many weeks out or you've gotten to, how has that developed for you over time?
But being closed Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, I can cheat a lot.
When did you make that decision to be closed Monday, Tuesday?
I made that over 7 years ago, and that's a whole different story. I'm fortunate that I I had two wonderful people I call my parents. You don't get to pick your parents. My sisters, I have two older sisters, and myself had wonderful people as parents. And they always wanted to die at home. They always voiced it. They wanted to stay in their home. They were very proud of their home. They're World War II generation, which I believe is the greatest generation ever to be around. And as they started their journey into growing old and losing their abilities to do for themselves, my sisters and I were able to pivot our lives and keep them in their homes. And that's what we did for over 7 years. We were able to keep them in their home and do for them what they could not do for themselves. And we were very fortunate that any medical issues that they had, we were able to pivot and do it ourselves. Granted, my mother went into hospice in her latter weeks in her life, but I decided to close my shop on Tuesdays so I could help expedite that, keeping them in their home. So I was over there Saturdays after I closed my shop and stayed till Tuesday afternoon. And that's why I closed on Tuesdays, to keep my mom and dad in their home as they aged. And we took care of them, my sisters and I. Not only am I fortunate to have two beautiful people I call my parents, I have two sisters who are equally as beautiful.
Well, and I'm wondering too, how come they never came and, worked for you? I'm thinking about, you hanging on the phone and the door and processing people that very naturally you could have, and I'm sure they've got their own things. I'm not saying that they should have worked for you, but did you ever think of having somebody even just part-time, clerking for you?
I have. I did. And there was a time that I wanted to mentor somebody and teach them the trade. And I used myself as an example. And I think we touched on this a while back, that for me, it took me 2 to 3 years to feel comfortable to what was coming in the door, where I didn't have to lament over it. And then a couple more years to really get into the flow of getting it where it was acceptable. And I wanted to mentor somebody back in the day when I wasn't in my end game, if you will. And it never materialized. I had people who romanticized being their own boss and owning their own business and didn't realize just the amount of work and effort that you have to do to do that. The long hours on your feet, and plus a little business like mine, there's no benefits. I mean, there's no paid
Well, I mean,
vacations.
you pay, you got to pay for all that.
I pay for all that. So it never materialized. And I even tried to bring in somebody to wake the counter. And if they're asking me how much a jar of polish is after 2 months of employment, they're wasting my time and their time. So I got to the point where it was a lot. Granted, I had to work longer hours, but it was simpler for me not to handle or carry the baggage of someone else who really didn't want to be there. Because if they did, it would have manifested itself into a different direction.
Yeah, it's such a shame because I've told you this before, that I've observed in Europe, being a cobbler is still very vibrant and alive, and multiple in different neighborhoods in Paris. So, for example, the cobbler I worked with, he happened to be 4 doors down from my apartment, but if I'd gone over one street, either way, I could have run into other ones. And the way that it works in that city, it doesn't matter where you move afterwards. You'll come back. You'll take the metro. Same thing with your tailor. You just develop these relationships, and I always would run into a younger person who was waiting on the counter, and I could see sometimes the older gentleman would come wait on me, and I saw him working on shoes, the younger person. So there's very much still in Europe, because it's been around 1,000 years, a notion of apprenticeship. It's not an alien idea. Of course, you can go understudy under somebody, potentially work a trade, potentially buy the business from them, etc. And yet, in America, this land of entrepreneurship, land of opportunity, for whatever reason, particularly in your trade, I think it's lamentable that someone hasn't stepped forward. But as you say, there's a certain fate to it that, if it's meant to be, it's gonna go in. And your direction now, and I don't know how many times the conversations come up with us over the years. I'm like, what's the end game for you? What do you have planned? It's like, man, I'm just gonna keep working. So again, going back to the business broker side of what we do here at Apex, what do you see as the end game for yourself, knowing that you were not able to apprentice, and it's not as if business broke people who are out to buy a business say, oh, I'd like to buy, a shoe repair place for myself. And then I'm going to apprentice myself, over the next couple of years. That is unlikely. What's your plan for yourself?
Well, I'm 66 as I speak right now, and I am now actively engaged in conversation with the people that are going to help mentor me to transcend into the retirement. I'm not a big fan of the word retirement, but closing down my shop. And I'm very fortunate that next door, my neighbor, both we own the building. So we're pretty much on the same page. He has upped his timeline a little bit more than mine. But the sad part about it is I now really never really gave it a lot of thought years ago, but I put a lot of effort and time into my business, but at the end game, it's not really worth anything because no one's buying shoe repairs. Now, everything that's in there, I hope I'm able to sell off to either my distributor might buy the machinery, or I might put it out on the market and see if somebody will buy it. There's not a big demand for the type of machinery that I use, but I'm going to ride off into the sunset. I would probably do a little bit, an element of what I do in my four walls. Outside of the four walls, I do a lot of orthopedic work. So I want to keep those customers because I think they rely on me, and I enjoy doing that type of work. It's something I still look at and go, yeah, before I could have done this a little different, but
I mean,
eventually.
are we gonna see you at farmers markets? Healer of souls here.
Oh, I don't know. My girlfriend, Angie, she says, maybe we should open up a boutique shoe repair, pick and choose what you want to do, and I'm fortunate where I have room in my home and even room in her place that I could set up a really small shoe repair with just the minimal stuff and just, keep my finger on it. I think for me personally, like I said, I was fortunate to be in business this long, been able to buy the building in which my business is at. And so I have options where I don't have to do anything, to do another. So I'll probably keep on keeping on, doing a little few things. Ideally, I would love to be able to just shut that door, turn the light off, and walk out the back door and they're done. But that's the romantic in me,
Sure.
I'm going off into the sunset. But in the next, couple years, like I said, I'm not only thinking about it, I'm actively engaged in getting that pendulum swinging in that direction where it's been a good run.
I mean, I hope you're going to give us the opportunity to honor you and have a celebration of the place. Because, I mean, it's been decades. As you say, there's been generations. I haven't had any children to bring to you, but there are other people like me who, have built a relationship with you over the years and are curious as to what you are doing. So I think that idea of, the lights going off, that was the worst case scenario for us. Like, where did he go? What is he doing? And I think, too, there will be a lot of lamenting from all of us as to, well, how did this happen? And you're not responsible. The idea that it's your fault, that I think we can only just look around ourselves as a society, that we have not encouraged craftsmanship or apprenticeship. And this is one of the fallouts. This is one of the casualties, that if we had encouraged this in the society, instead of, let's say, chasing the lowest cost item, or chasing, oh, everyone's got to go to college, or all these other nonsenses that we've built our society on, we wouldn't have this. We would have fostered a society in which you would have had 2 or 3 people coming to you, and then you might have mentored them, and then they might have started their own practices. Like, hey, why don't you go down to 150, whatever? They don't have anybody down there. They got to drive all the way up here. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll build one down there. That in a society in which those things were valued, you'd have that. Or maybe, okay, you're only going to do this type of shoe. That person's going to specialize. Like, oh, that one only does women's shoes or whatever else. That there are all these possibilities that will not be pursued for whatever reason or another. But I hope you give us an opportunity to celebrate the shop, celebrate you before you turn those lights out. It'll be a sad thing if we just go there one day. It's like, oh, he's not here. Where'd he go?
Well, I hear and I hope that the pendulum will swing, that there'll be more skilled labor, people getting into skilled crafts. And I think it will happen. I don't know what will happen in my lifetime as a business owner, but you know, it's a shoe repair. It's more than just a job. It's I've met so many wonderful people, and it's given me a just I don't know, it's a good feeling, being part of a community. And that's what I feel like, because I'm part of a community. And that's what it's all about, I think, at the end of the day, being part of, and what can you bring to it?
Well, it's got to be a tremendous amount of satisfaction for you to look back and think about, what you've been able to do, you've literally built things that you can see. Not everyone's able to do that. A lot of us work with spreadsheets or, data and things that, they're not tangible, but you've been able to see what you've built, and that's a wonderful gift. But to look back with satisfaction, I've helped a lot of people, not just with their shoes, but, with their lives. I've heard advice, I've given advice. Um, and how many people would like to say, like, at the end of my working life, I would like to be able to say that. And you're able to say that, and you're not even through, working yet. So I think that in itself is its own testimony, and that's enviable. And this is where, as we get to the end of our discussion today, I've taken up so much of your time, so I don't want to take up too much more, but this is where I extract these nuggets of wisdom out of you, because you've been giving plenty throughout today's conversation, but to say to younger people who are starting their journey, and then also yourself, maybe a lesson or two that you didn't expect to learn on your business journey. So we'll start with the first one. You're talking to young people, they're listening to this. What would you tell them, they should be thinking about as they begin their journey towards something that could potentially be as fulfilling and gratifying as what you've had a chance to do?
I think maintaining an open mind and realize that you're not going to, if you have a vision of being something or becoming something, seek it out. Nothing is etched in stone. You can always pivot, and the only failure is if you don't try it. And the key is just to stay focused and keep true to yourself and your dream. If you want to own your own business, you can do it. Will it be a multi-billion-dollar industry? Only God knows, and He doesn't tell you. But stay the course. Keep your sense of the direction, and believe in yourself. Because if you don't believe in yourself, no one will. And that comes out in your demeanor. It really does. Lord, help the man who doubts himself. And you just got to stay the course.
And that's great. That's great. And then, as I said, business lessons you've learned along the way. One I thought you mentioned, which I think all of us click on at some point if we're paying attention, if we're aware, as you have shown your awareness, is how you do one thing is how you do everything. Learn that. What other things along the way, one or two things you feel have been really helpful to you that you think would be helpful to other people to share?
Personally, and I use this not just in my business, but a lot in my business, is be authentic and be transparent and do what you need, do what you say you are going to do, and just don't do it because they want you to. You got to be true to yourself and your trade. And because false gods, man, it just doesn't work. You got to be able to do what you say, and then when at the end of the day, present it. And everything else is left to that other side of the counter. I don't like sudden stops. I tell them what I'm going to do. I tell them how I'm going to do it, what it's going to look like, and it's going to last. And if I can't say those four things, I'll try to talk them out of it. But at the end of the run, it's up to them. Just be transparent, be authentic, and be accountable. Do what you're going to do. Your hours on the door say this, be there. Be there. And it's simple. It's not rocket science. Just be true.
I love it. I can't think of a better way to end the interview. Henry, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for sharing your journey with us. There's lots of conversation, lots of different ways that we could take the conversation that I'm still thinking about that we're going to talk about offline. But just to let people know, obviously you're in downtown Overland Park. You're on 80th Street, right?
7522 West 80th, northeast corner of 80th and Concert. I can't count how many times I've said that.
And he's told you he's not open on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and open at 10, close at 6.
Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 6, Saturday, 8 to 3.
And just a reminder that if you call and he doesn't pick up the phone, he's talking to one of us, and just call back or stop in, and he'll be able to fix anything that you can think of, and maybe a few things that you haven't. And if you have an idea about something, I only found out today in the interview about the pants and the patches. So there's tons of stuff that if you can think it, a lot of times those of us who don't have the ability to pull it off artistically, we can at least think it, and then we can take it to somebody who could pull it off, and they could tell us, well, that's crazy, or you can't do that. So given me a few ideas to think about what could I have Henry work on. But as always, thanks so much for your time, buddy. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.